Dr. Suaibu Umaru, and I will be presenting on the statistical analysis plan, some few steps on how to establish a statistical analysis plan. So our presentation is going to be done according to the following outline. So we are going to define a statistical analysis plan, explain when we have to write a statistical analysis plan, see some sections of this plan, and then end with the conclusion. At the end of this lecture, you should be able to know when exactly you have to write a statistical analysis plan, what are the main sections and what it takes to write the statistical analysis plan, and how are you going to choose the statistical method for your analysis. So a statistical analysis plan is a detailed document outlining the different strategies and statistical method we are going to use in analyzing the data for a research study or a clinical trial. It is important because you help us to be able to interpret our data normally and reduce the possible errors that might arise when we are concluding in our study, reduce potential bias that is always involved, help to avoid what we call data-driven decisions, that you might not be tempted at the end to decide based on the data you have, but you should be able to tailor out your objectives and then follow them till the final data you obtain in such a way that your data or your result align with your research objectives. It also helps us to ensure that the data is collected on all variables, hence we have no missing variables which we may realize and jubilate at the end of our study, and it guarantees that this study can be reproducible by any other person. And when exactly do we have to write a statistical analysis plan? From the previous slide, we can say that we have to draw this plan even before our data collection begins. That means ideally when the study is designed, it is important to also design your analysis plan. This will help you to include the variables that we're missing maybe in your questionnaire, and also give you a clear idea of how you are going to manage your data to obtain the result you want. And it should be noted that you can modify your statistical analysis plan, hence writing it as early as possible won't stop you from modifying if you have some justified modifications along the way. But who writes a statistical analysis plan? Is it you, the investigator, or the person doing the analysis? Both of the persons have a role to play. The investigator will have to define clearly the objectives of the study and also clearly bring out the study variables. The statistician on his own will clarify the research question or hypothesis, identify the outcome variables related to the research question, address issues of bias, make sure the sample size calculation is well done, and also decide on the appropriate statistical method that are going to be used for the analysis. And a statistical analysis plan has different sections. Of course, we have an introduction where you have to talk about the background and the rationale of your study while you are carrying out the study. You have to clearly identify the objectives and the study hypothesis, clearly state the study design because it is also going to guide the type of analysis you are going to do and even how you are going to carry out your study. The sample size calculation, like we said, should be as accurate as possible. Also, the study population should be clear with your inclusion and exclusion criteria clearly stated. You should now clearly bring out your statistical methods and then decide on what values you are going to be reporting and how you are going to be presenting these variables. And at the end, you have to cite the different references you've used. So the research question, you have strategies of bringing out an interesting research question. We have the final model and the PICO strategies. This will help you to tailor out the good research question that should be feasible at the end, meaning it should be practical and achievable. A research question has to be interesting, meaning it has to be engaging both for the researcher and your target audience. Has to be novel. That means your research question should add to existing body of literature, or it should be addressing either a new area. Also have the ethical aspect where your study should cause no harm. It should also protect the privacy and confidentiality of your participants. And of course, it has to be relevant and have a clear significance. Also, we have the PICO or the PICO framework based on the context, where you have to clearly state your study population, the exposure or your intervention based on the study you are carrying out, the comparison group, and the outcome. So following these two formats, of course, this will help you to really define your research question and make sure it is relevant for the particular work you have to carry out. You also have to clearly state your research objectives. You can use the SMART criteria to formulate your research objectives. Meaning, the research objective has to be specific, measurable, attainable. They have to be relevant and time bound. So here we're trying to explain that you have to clearly define your study hypothesis and also know the nature, whether it's one-sided or two-sided, because it is going to help you in your decision. Also, that you have to bear in mind, whether we reject or we fail to reject our null hypothesis, we are bound to have some errors. So you have to also make way for that, like the type 1 error where we reject a true null hypothesis, or a type 2 error where we fail to reject a false null hypothesis. So in your statistical analysis plan, you also have to clearly bring out your study variables. And in a table, you can clearly identify the variables involved per objective and how you are going to represent or how you are going to analyze this variable. So you take maybe the first objective, you identify the different variables, and you give your details in a tabular form. Are the percentages you have to present? Is it the p value, confidence interval, or odds ratios? You have to also plan how you are going to present those variables. Next, you have to clearly, like we said, state your inclusion and exclusion criteria, your sample size calculation, and your sampling design. And you have to familiarize yourself when making your statistical analysis plan with some concepts that are generally used in the statistics, like the level of significance, which we call alpha in statistics, which is that maximum probability of rejecting a true null hypothesis, or the type 1 error we just saw. Also, the type of hypothesis, like we said, can be one-sided, two-sided, where they are different. That means one is greater than the other, or one is less than the other. But you also have equivalent, where you have to determine if two interventions or treatment are equivalent or maybe not significantly different. Also, you have the concept of non-inferiority, where you have to just prove that maybe a new treatment is not significantly worse than a standard or a known therapy. Also, the confidence interval, you have to know it, which is the range of values within which your population parameter likely lies. And when also conducting your statistical test, you might be
faced with a situation where you have to conduct multiple statistical analysis on the same data, and you might have some false positives or type 1 errors. So there are ways of correcting that, um, which you have to plan for in your statistical analysis plan. So in case you have multiple primary endpoints or multiple groups that you are going to compare, we are going to see some of the ways by which you can correct this. Hence, at the end, after designing this, you also have to split your work into two, like your descriptive statistics, where you have to clearly state your dependent or the outcome variables, your explanatory variables, and the inferential statistics, where, of course, you are doing with the statistical method and the analysis proper. So at the end, you have to decide what statistical method you are going to use for which variable or for which analysis. So based on what you are trying to analyze, whether you are looking at the correlation between two variables, whether you are measuring the association between a predictor and an outcome variable, and based on the type of variables, whether they are qualitative or quantitative variables, you have what we call parametric and non-parametric tests that you can use in each case. So globally, we can say that you use what we call parametric tests when you are dealing with continuous variables, normally distributed data, or when you have large samples, and non-parametric when your data is maybe skewed and say smaller size. So for most of the parametric test, you have the corresponding non-parametric test. And in deciding which statistical test you are going to use, you have to first of all identify what measure you are trying to carry out and on what type of variable you are going to apply this. So it will be much easier when you stratify this way to be able to identify the right statistical test we are going to use to study our variables. This is still the same way based on the number of variables you are trying to analyze. Maybe are they two groups or more than two groups? Are they taken from the same sample or from different samples? Also, you might be faced with this choice of using the statistical test, and it applies the same as we explained. That means you have to identify your type of variables and then your sample size and the distribution of your data. It can help you determine what type of statistical test will best help for your analysis. The next, you're going to discuss how each test is going to be checked, like normality, multicollinearity, diagnostic plot, and also you have to, in case of violation of assumptions, how you are going to take care of that. Also, you have to know that in some type of data, you may be having outliers. So how are you going to investigate these outliers? How are you going to take care of the effect of these outliers? Of course, you have to also do projections when doing your statistical analysis plan. In research or in most of our studies, we are faced with the concept of missing data. So in our statistical analysis plan, it will help us also plan on how we are going to handle this aspect, whether we can use complete case analysis, imputation analysis, or other methods of taking care of missing data. And also, if we are going to do subgroup analysis, this will help us already plan on the purpose of our subgroup analysis and what test we are going to use in carrying out our subgroup analysis. Like we said earlier, at the end, you also have to report your data. So you have to decide what data you are going to report and how are you going to present your result. So are you going to use figures? Are you going to use tables? And what data is best suitable for or what form of maybe presentation. So for example, you can use shell tables and graphs typically for demographic data, your primary and secondary outcomes. So mostly for your descriptive part. And also you have to clearly state the statistical software you are going to use for data collection, data management, and statistical analysis. This will help you also identify the software which you best know how to use and facilitate your collection and analysis. So you do your analysis on RedCap, APM4, or maybe SPSS, R, most of them based on which one you find easier to use. You can also identify it in your analysis plan. So at the end, we are going to say that the statistical analysis plan serves us as a guide and should be done prior to conducting a study. It ensures transparency and reproducibility, can be modified if you have proper justifications along the way. So thank you very much for your keen attention.